On the afternoon of September the 17th, thousands of pagers started beeping in Lebanon, just moments before they were detonated across the country. And now that you're aware of this incident, the next time your smartphone starts making these sounds, are you going to have a second thought? In this episode, we dive into the recent pager explosions that have rocked Lebanon and explore the concerns that have surfaced in the aftermath. And now, back to the pressing issue on how worried you should be about the safety of your own electronics. The most accepted hypothesis on the detonation of these pagers is that a supply chain for these products were intercepted by Israel. Even though the country has not claimed responsibility for this massive explosion, but there are reports from American media that an anonymous U.S. official has stated that Israel has given a heads up to America prior to the detonation, and the country is responsible for this explosion. But as Israel has not claimed responsibility publicly, all the current hypotheses can only make assumptions based on what we know so far, and with information available from the explosion in Beirut on 17th and the 18th, at this moment it does seem that the modified pagers are still within the border of Lebanon and several surrounding countries. And it's extremely likely that people outside this region will have access or ownership of these electronic products. But it's not to say entirely impossible, and we will look into that later. The attack in Lebanon this time has shocked the world, not only for its large scale, but also that the detonation was achieved through pagers, an ordinary product for civilian uses. Just like when you buy a can of soda from the shop, you just pop it open without having any second thought that it might be poisonous. And this thought that an ordinary civilian merchandise, an outdated one to be honest, a pager might even be a bomb, has struck fear among Lebanese, even many people outside Lebanon. And right after the explosion on September the 17th, health officials in Lebanon ordered the public to avoid using not only pagers, but also other handheld communication devices. The former U.S. Secretary of Defense and the director of CIA, Leon Panetta, has openly called out this attack in Lebanon an act of terrorism. And his exact words were, "To place an explosive in technology that's very prevalent these days and to turn it into a war of terror." And he doesn't think there's any questions that this is a form of terrorism. But in contrary, as you read through the coverage of this massive attack in Lebanon, there doesn't seem to be a sense of shock or severity of this issue. Many major media outlets are trying to delineate this as an attack on Hezbollah rather than on the people of Lebanon, just regular, ordinary Lebanese people like you and I, and there is a serious difference between these definitions. Since Hezbollah has been portrayed as a terrorist group by the US and a few other countries, by emphasizing or insinuating that the scope of the attack is limited to only the members of the armed group might bring down the empathy that readers have for those that are suffering, or at least confuse the readers. And take this report from BBC as an example. So on the second day of the explosion, BBC wrote in the leading paragraph that the number of people killed when pagers used by members of the armed group Hezbollah exploded on Tuesday has risen to 12. So, I'm not sure if you have noticed this awkward sounding tongue twister. The number of people killed when pagers used by members of the armed group Hezbollah exploded on Tuesday has risen to 12. The report could have just said the number of people killed has risen to 12, but the writer just has to throw in a piece of long and redundant information that ends with members of the armed group Hezbollah. And by the time you finish reading this sentence, you might just unconsciously draw the connection that Hezbollah members died. How many? 12. Which in fact should be the number of deaths of ordinary Lebanese people, civilians, and that is exactly what happened. And even in this same report by BBC, right after it told that the number rose to 12, the report also provided details that among these 12 people died, there were 2 children and 4 medics. Half of the deaths are civilians, plus nearly 3,000 people injured. And it's not what it reads like, not Hezbollah members, but rather half were civilians. And the truth is simply that the explosion was not an operation that precisely targeted members of Hezbollah. You must have seen the most viral video from the surveillance camera in a grocery store in Beirut. The pager was detonated in a man's pocket when he was surrounded by at least 10 other shoppers, including 2 children. And in a follow-up attack on the second day, there was even an explosion by an ambulance, which is surrounded by almost 100 civilian bystanders. And bear this in mind, even if this assault was carefully, precisely carried out against Hezbollah, this group is only identified as a terrorist group by a handful of countries. As a matter of fact, Hezbollah is also one of the largest political parties in Lebanon, with its members serving at the national parliament and the cabinet. However, there seems to be evidence that Israel actually did try to contain the impact prior to the detonation. So, some people have dug out an internal email from one of the largest hospitals in Beirut, the American University Beirut Medical Center, and the email has revealed that by the end of August, which is about 10 days before the explosion, this hospital had started switching its old pagers with new ones among the doctors and staff members for technical reasons. And given this suspicious timing for the replacement, there are many people that just cannot help wonder if there's any connection between the pagers being swapped off in this hospital and the ones that had a bomb implanted in them, which exploded across Lebanon. This speculation might sound a bit stretching to some people, but as timeline has now entered October, there still seems to be lacking investigations that look into this batch of pagers that got swapped off from the hospital and confirm whether they've also been modified or even weaponized. And this has also become a popular conspiracy theory because of the strong alliance between the US and Israel. And many believe that America was tipped off on the detonation, and this medical center had been instructed to swap off their pagers. And all this indicates that this batch of weaponized pagers is in fact no longer limited within the members of Hezbollah, but rather alarmingly, it has been circulating among civilians across Lebanon, or even more terrifying, outside the country or even the region. And in terms of the origin of the pagers, a company named Golden Apollo on the Taiwan island. Just to keep in mind that the US has been inciting Taiwan's secession from China, and their suspicion surrounding this company in Taiwan of its connection with the US government and suspected infiltration by American intelligence operatives. And in the follow-up explosion on the second day, the modified products were no longer just pagers, but also walkie-talkies, which were later identified as products manufactured by a company named ICOM, which is a company based in Japan, another firm ally country of the US. And now, coming back to the core question, how concerned should I be for my electronics? First thing to know is that Israel was only able to modify and intercept the pagers because Hezbollah members chose the low-tech communication device. And unless you're a collector of vintage electronics, or you have a special channel of procurement through the black market, otherwise, the products you own have already gone through countless quality controls and checks, especially under the current global division of labor, where raw materials, parts and components, and manufacturing are from all over the world, and companies have developed a sophisticated system to make sure they have received and shipped away products that are up to standard. But of course, the real concerning part in Beirut's pagers explosion is not the device exploding on its own, but rather these ordinary-looking civilian products have been modified for military purposes. It's never been done before, not because it's difficult to carry out such an operation to weaponize the pagers, but because it's crossed the bottom line on many fronts of international norms and standards, and it's broken the trust along the global supply chain. And I may just be joking earlier that no one would run the poison test on a can of Coke, but following the explosion in Beirut, how confident can people still remain when the next time they purchase products from across the border? And it's already been reported that manufacturers in China have received special orders from Middle Eastern countries with requests that specifically ask the electronics to be manufactured in the Chinese mainland and a direct shipment from China that doesn't stop in a third country. And it's funny that the US and some of its allies have been fabricating national security concerns over Chinese electronics, from ZTE to Huawei, and now a range of electronic car brands. And now after the explosion of thousands of pagers and walkie-talkies in Lebanon, there are people that have come to the realization that these products from the US and the West are posing the real threat. And this time, it's not the type of danger that just eavesdrop your phone calls and search history. And that has brought us to the end of this episode of Deep Dive. If you enjoyed this special episode and the new style that we are experimenting, make sure to leave a like or comment to let us know. And we'll see you in the next one.